Hi, everyone. So there was been a little mix-up with my slides, so we're working on that, but I will go ahead and get started. Thank you all for coming. This is a dream of mine to be barefoot on a stage, so I've manifested that already. Thank you. This talk is probably one of the hardest ones I've given in my life. I've given hundreds of talks. It's part of my job, actually. But they're all about science and data and numbers and healthcare. And so they're really easy to hide behind facts and numbers and science concepts. I've never spoken about a personal matter on a stage before. So y'all are my first. Thank you. But I'm really excited. I have a fun tale to tell. Hopefully the slides are coming. But the title of my talk, and I do want to say I have some notes that I will probably be referring to. They're, again, part of my training wheels as a newbie at this being personal on a stage thing. But the title of my talk is Escaping the Cage. And it took a long time for me to come up with a title. I had all the concepts of this talk, but I realized that that was the perfect metaphor to describe, I think, a phenomenon that most of us feel in modern society, very trapped. That's definitely how I have felt a lot of my adult life. And this yearning to be free, this yearning for something that we can't always put words to. At least I couldn't for many, many years. And I know I'm preaching to the choir, which is kind of nice. And I also think it's incredible kismet that all of these talks have built on each other. And so I will actually be building on a lot of the things that everyone has already shared, which is super exciting. But a bit about me. I am a primary care physician. I have a background in emergency medicine. It was my first career, and that burned me out real quick. This is way before the pandemic, by the way. And so I transitioned to primary care because I thought, what better way to serve? I get to know my patients. And I also work in global health and in public health. And currently I work as a public health professional for the state of California, and I do urgent care per diem. So that's my professional side. But on an amateur level, I'd say I'm more of an anthropologist. Oh, there they are. Yay. Thank you. Awesome. So exciting. Okay. Does anyone have a clicker? So we have a bit of a journey to go on. Shall we get started? Where do I point it? Voila. Okay. So back to our evolutionary stages. This journey, we're going to go way back when we were stardust or protokaryotes, whatever you want to believe. Either one, I think, is correct. So this journey is 4 billion years in the making. We started as little single-celled organisms. And then from there, we became fish. From there, we became tetrapods. From there, we became mammals. Then apes, then Homo sapiens. Now, if you take out the single-celled organism, see, technology, not good, I'm too wild. If you take out the cellular side, it's still several 100 million years of evolution from fish to Homo sapiens. We were primates for 65 million years. And humans, anyone know how long we've been Homo sapiens? Little longer. 300,000. Late 80s, exactly. So the point is, numbers, whatever, not my thing really in this talk, but we have been animals for a really, really, really long time, right? First we were fish, then we were mammals, then we were apes. So remember that. That's an important concept. We'll get back to it. Okay. Here come the boring graphs and statistics, but we're going to fly through them. So this graph, it's a little bright. I'm not sure if you can see. We've been Homo sapiens, like I said, for 300,000 years, right? And we've made a lot of gains in that time. Our life expectancy the past few hundred years has more than doubled. At one point, it was rare for us to live past 30, right? We've developed technology, wealth, we have ChatGPT, right? We're super advanced. However, in the last few decades, we've been seeing a bit of a dropping off, right, in certain health indicators. So this graph looks at life expectancy at birth from 1980 to 2021. And as our case study, we're going to be focusing on the United States. So the comparable country average, and looking at trends over time is important in most things, but particularly in public health, we like to look at trends versus one point in time. And so you see a decline here, obviously, COVID-19 pandemic. Did anyone hear about the declining life expectancy with the pandemic? Probably most people, no? Okay. Well, it did go down a bit, and that's unfortunately to be expected. But as you can see, most countries recovered, but not the United States. What's even more concerning is that we have been steadily dropping off the curve since 1980, right? And to me, and I think anyone that works in medicine, I used to see pediatrics. I saw a lot of kids in my practice. And, with kids, you look at growth charts. Anyone a parent? Know their growth charts? Yeah, right? Love the chart. And again, one point in time can be concerning, maybe not. Weight goes down a little. Okay, we'll recheck in a month or a couple months. When you start to see a trend over time, a kid's losing weight, a kid's not growing as fast as they should, that's concerning. That tells us something's probably wrong, and deserves another look. So, what's going on? Why would we be getting sicker the last 40 years? More fun charts. So America loves being first at everything, right? So adults in the US are the most likely to have multiple chronic conditions. This probably comes as no surprise to anyone here. Over 30% of Americans have more than one chronic illness. We're also more likely to have a mental health condition. Over 23% of Americans have been diagnosed with a mental health condition at some point. And these are 2016 numbers, so it's probably much higher now. I could keep going with these graphs because it looks like this for almost every disease condition you can imagine. Diabetes, heart disease, dementia. The US is pretty much always number one, maybe top three. So why is that? Why are we getting sicker? Last graph, I swear. So I really like this one because it magnifies the problem even more. So you see the life expectancy of birth on that y-axis over time, the US dropping off, but on the x-axis you actually have healthcare spending per capita, right? So again, we are spending a lot more money than pretty much every other comparable countries. That's other developed countries, Netherlands, UK, Canada, et cetera. So we are spending a lot more and dying sooner, or we're much less healthy. So why are we getting so sick? I know I've asked that a couple times. Is it our food? Yeah, that's a big one. Our Big Macs, our bread that never breaks down. Karen shared with me earlier an anecdote of camping in Virginia and buying a loaf of bread from Walmart, right? And left it in her car for a year, unopened, went back, and it was just the same as when she bought it. I know, it's great. Is it our physical inactivity? We love our cars. Mass shootings. Drug overdoses. Sunglasses. Yeah, I know. It's there's a lot of reasons Americans are so sick. So, yes, it is all of those things, right? But what if there's something underlying all of that? Some unifying factor that makes Americans, honestly, the sickest people in the world. And I've worked a lot of places, and as a whole, we are the sickest people. Yep. So I really love this quote by David Foster Wallace. The most obvious, ubiquitous, important realities are often the ones hardest to see and talk about. Our modern lives, particularly in the West and in America, our case study here, generate chronic stressors that lead to chronic illness. Most disease states today are a factor of how we live our lives. They are not your genetics. They are not personal choices. Those can play a role, sure, they do. But that's not the reason we're so sick. It is our culture, our society is making us so sick. Enter the caged animal hypothesis. So, I definitely don't want to take credit for coming up with this. I think this is kind of I'm probably the first person I've known to say it this way, especially from a health perspective, but a lot of evolutionary biologists have generated ideas that kind of help frame this for me in a way. So it's my belief as a physician and public health practitioner that part of the reason, all of the reason you could say, that we're so unhealthy is that we are trapped in cages. These are not obviously literal cages, unless you're in the prison system or other nefarious circumstances that do exist, I realize, but most of us are not literally trapped in a cage, right? But metaphorical cages of our own design, cages that society builds for us. Those cages are different for every person. So my cage is going to be very different than Karin's cage, than Eric's cage, than Liren's cage. But we all have a cage. And those cages make us sick. Because when you cage an animal, it's not a happy time for that animal. And to illustrate my point, we're going to do a little field trip on this journey to the zoo. Zoos are a very polarizing topic, and I'm not going to focus on the ethics of them. I loved the zoo when I was a kid. I got so much joy out of it, and I do think, say what you will about zoos, I do think they're a very interesting place and an interesting laboratory. Again, the ethics notwithstanding, to compare differences between caged and wild animals. So one of the more fascinating examples of this is our closest primate relative, the bonobo. Has everyone heard of a bonobo? It's similar to a chimpanzee. Some people say it's the chimp, some people say bonobo. Anyway, both very close relatives of ours, genetically. So bonobos, scientists have noticed some different things. In the wild, bonobos can act basically a little depressed. Like they live in these social groups, and if they get kind of picked on by other bonobos, they withdraw, they get a bit sad, they don't groom themselves, but that's about it. In captivity, it's very, very different. These behaviors transition into really compulsive behaviors: tics, rocking, extreme aggression, infanticide, multiple escape attempts, loss of libido. This is one of the reasons it's so hard to breed animals in captivity. They don't want to mate. As a primary care physician, I can say loss of libido is one of the chief complaints that I would see in my practice. And this statistic is a true one, that 65% of zoo-based primates exhibit some form of depression. And scientists do believe that this is, the bonobo equivalent of depression. All these behaviors that I will say, as a clinician, are very similar to how humans can exhibit depression, right? I think we all know that. Many zoo animals are put on Antidepressants, such as Prozac, antipsychotics, such as haloperidol, they will behave. It's not just primates. You see this in elephants and carnivores. Pretty much all mammals hate being encaged. One could posit that being trapped in small manufactured environments, despite an abundance of food and water and safe haven from predators, leads to depression in most mammals. So why do we think we are any different? So there's a lot of parts to the caged animal hypothesis, but today we're going to just focus on one, which is that cages cut you off from your natural habitat. Let me go back to my notes here. So, yeah, the more tame we become, the more we lose sight of the things that are important to us, right? Our natural surroundings. I think we all can agree on that. And Americans are some of the most tame people, I would say, in the world. American adults spend less time outside per day than they do in their cars, only about 5% of their day on average. American teens only 10% of American teens spend any time outdoors at all on a daily basis. And probably this surprises no one here, especially if you have kids, but modern kids know more about Pokemon characters than they do the wildlife in their own neighborhood. And I think, there's a lot of research about how being separate from nature can affect us mentally and physically. You don't need to be a scientist to understand that. I think if we look at the COVID-19 pandemic, what happened in major cities? As a society, we were terrified. Especially, I want to say especially, but my experience in America, people fled, right? They fled cities. They felt truly trapped, I think, most people for the first time in their life. And where do people go? Nature. At least the people I know, like in San Francisco, all fled to Tahoe, fled to Montana, fled to Idaho, to space, to nature, to get away, right? So why is that? So this I'm not going to focus too much on, but another reason being cut off from our natural habitat, I don't want to make this talk about climate change. I know we get a lot of talks about that anyway, but this is what I call the 4Ds. So development, deforestation, natural disasters, desertification. And again, you don't need to be a scientist to understand how bad this is for us, right, as mammals. So the question, right, is now that you know about this hypothesis, can we change it? Can we reconfigure our lives to be more in nature? The answer is yes, it is possible. And I'm going to tell you a little case study of myself. So yeah, this is the part I need my training wheels, even though it's the part that I know the best of this talk. So coming at the end of 2019, I had 2 major shoulder surgeries. I've been really injured for a long time and pretty depressed because movement is a huge part of my life. And coming out of that, my partner, who I thought was the love of my life, dumped me suddenly in January 2020. And then the pandemic hit, as we remember, and San Francisco completely shut down on my birthday. And it was a time of great reckoning for me. I realized kind of how small my life had become, how I think many of us re-examined our lives really early in those days, and I was so chronically stressed. I was working, years of 60-plus hour work weeks, tons of repressed trauma that I'd never really dealt with that just kept going. The aforementioned things, the breakup, the injuries. I realized And I looked okay on the outside. I was going through the motions. I was, but I was starting to feel really trapped. I kind of vacillated between numbness and extreme pain. And I had all these coping mechanisms, right? I was chronically busy. I had this great social life. I was traveling. I partying. It was like all these things to distract me from the pain that I was holding on to. And when that happened, I started to feel that suffocation. I don't know if anyone here has felt that feeling of your life closing in on you. My job got really intense, and I was working for a very toxic, and I will not name them, healthcare corporation in the Bay Area, and it got just insane, my workload, and in those early days of the pandemic, and my living situation started to fall apart as well. My roommates and I were just not getting along. My personal, mental health was really starting to go, and all I could think about was, I can't do this. I can't do this. I can't do this anymore. At times, I was even suicidal. And I was not a depressed person, but there have been times in my career when I've had these cycles of burnout that the overwhelm was so intense that seemed the best option at times. I knew it wasn't, rationally. I could always get myself out of it, but you get to that place of overwhelm. And a lot of healthcare workers have been there. And a lot of you, I'm sure, know what I'm talking about as well. So yeah, I was a desperate animal in a cage. All I could think of is, I gotta get out of here. And my my opportunity, sorry, I'm laughing already, soon presented itself in a very unlikely form, in the form of a rebound relationship with a sailor. Yes, the rebound finally works out. I mean, it's the pandemic. What are you going to do? There's nothing else to do. No, truly. We made the really brilliant decision after dating for 3 months to buy a boat together. I know. What could go wrong there? I knew it was crazy when I did it, and I did not care. I did not care what anyone thought, maybe a little, but I was so desperate, like I said. I was like, this, even if it doesn't work, I'm getting out of here. So, so we bought a boat, and initially the plan had been to just, use it as our fun sail around in the bay boat. And we did want to sail to Baja the following year. That was on the docket. But as I mentioned, I was desperate and kind of pushed our timeline ahead to September of that year. We bought the boat in July, FYI. So yeah, we were real crazy and we went for it. He had been sailing longer than I, and I had done some sailing, but never open water, and never in the Pacific. Just a beast. So yeah, we set sail for Baja, fall of 2020. I sold most of my possessions, put the rest in storage, quit my job, left my apartment, et cetera, et cetera. I escaped. And I had no idea what I was doing next. We did not have much money saved. We had not really prepared. We were applying for our Coast Guard paperwork as we were underway, because you can't cross international waters unless you have, the right permits. So we're like, well, California, we got a long ways to go. It'll come through eventually. We had to wait actually longer than we thought, but we did finally cross over in international waters. So yeah, that journey was really stressful. Sailing off the Pacific coast of Baja can be really gnarly. Especially in the winter, the swell gets pretty big, and there were 2 times I thought we might die. Truly, I was crying. I was like, "This is it. Second time I was listening to Barack Obama on a podcast when I was at the helm, and I was like, at least he's talking to me as we go down. It's such a soothing voice, by the way. But despite this really stressful journey, we finally rounded the Cape around Cabo San Lucas and San Jose del Cabo right at the new year, so right at 2021. But my nervous system, strangely, began to settle. Even though this voyage was so stressful in its own way, it was something about it made me feel more alive than I had in 8 years. Skip some. Anyway, there's a few more slides in there that are missing, but that's fine. So essentially, we spend the next 6 months in the Sea of Cortez or Gulf of California. And my days were so peaceful. There was very little technology. I just spent every day exploring my surroundings, preparing food. And like I said, I started to calm down, to come home to myself, come home to my natural home, the earth. Even my dog, who, when we lived in San Francisco, was really terrified of going outside at night because all the sounds, and he has some vision impairment. He's old. So he would go out and pee and run back in. But even he started to chill out, and he loved being in Baja. And Lyra and I were talking about this with his dog, did the same thing when you moved here. I was like, oh, I'm home. The city sucks. So yeah, I fully leaned into this feral version of myself, a version that had been tamed for many years. I spent a lot of my 20s in jungles, and at one point felt quite wild. But a lot of time has passed since then. And yeah, I started to feel normal again, even though I was definitely a little wild thing running around the deserts of Baja. As one can predict, that relationship did not work out. I know. But no, it was truly a blessing. Nothing but gratitude after all the hurt feelings were done. But I was addicted at this point to being wild. There was no way I was going back in the cage. So I spent the next 9 months on a solo journey. The dog. It's never totally solo. All up and down the West Coast. We were in Washington, the Cascades, all the mountains down the Sierras, deserts of the Southwest. I just followed where my heart wanted to go. I wanted to see everything I could see. My days really I was working, by the way. I did end up having to go back to work, unfortunately. But it was a very chill job, and it allowed me the freedom to do that. And I am so grateful and fully recognize my privilege in being able to do that. But my days were about chasing awe and wonder. And it was the best feeling, truly. And during that time is when I started to think of all this. I started to wonder, why was I feeling so bad? Why do we all feel so bad? Why are we all so sick? And that's when I started to come up with this. And one thing was missing. I was so happy on the road and loved my time, but I realized I was missing my community. I missed my people. And so I moved back to the Bay a little over a year ago. San Francisco Bay is my home. But I was not going back in a cage this time because I had learned how to walk that line between wild and domesticated. And so it's been a rough reentry. I'm not going to lie. It was really hard to stay in one place all the time, and to sign a lease gave me heart palpitations. But I was so happy to be home. I'm so happy to be with my people. And part of the reason I wanted to come back in the cage but prop the door open was to start sharing this message, right? I really think that as clinicians, as public health practitioners, we focus so much on disease states, medications, and risk factors, et cetera. But very few people, they're starting to, but a little late now, starting to talk about why our society is making us so sick and what can we do about it. So that's a tall order, but we can start with ourselves. I never know where to point it. Thank you. I think you did that. So the solution, obviously, I think to everyone here, not a surprise, is we all need more time in nature. There are literally hundreds of studies talking about the health benefits of nature, right? Hundreds. Go out, you can find a plethora of research I'm not going to go through in the interest of time, but I will point out a few things that I find really interesting. So people who live or spend significant amounts of time in nature, about 2 hours per week is the sweet spot, but more is obviously better. At least 2 hours a week, we'll say, have pretty much lower rates of everything. All those chronic conditions that we went through earlier. And you have to be careful with cause and effect, right? Because you can find an association between just about anything. But I do find that interesting. But is it just because of exercise, right? Like a lot of people that are outdoors a lot are pretty active, right? That's a part of it. However, there's one interesting study I found that even after controlling for things like socioeconomic status and physical activity, that even living within a half a mile of nature and not using it has protective health benefits. These are people that don't even go, like they just live close, right? Maybe they're homebound, maybe, I didn't get into all the reasons there, but just living close to nature is protective for our health. Even short walks in the woods have measurable changes in our chemistry, our physiology. So our heart rate decreases, our blood pressure drops, our cortisol drops. How many people felt that today with the stand spot with Chris? Did you feel? Yeah, 5 minutes. It's crazy. Magic. And also one thing that's pretty cool and pretty exciting, new area of research, is everyone knows the term green space, but blue space as well. So coastal communities or anything near water also has really protective benefits. Coastal communities are typically the healthiest. And there's a lot of studies underway about that. My theory is that we were fish first before we were mammals, right? So obviously, we love being home. So a few ways to incorporate nature into your daily life. Move outdoors. Gyms are great. Probably most people here have a Peloton. I should get one because biking outdoors clearly breaks things on me. But yeah, it's better to move outside as much as you can. Walks, hikes, anything. Do it outdoors. Number 2 is, and we're all here at this gorgeous place, and a lot of you are living here or considering buying here, but seeking out those experiences that stimulate awe and wonder. And again, I know I'm preaching to the crowd, but there's a whole scientific field now looking at the science of awe and like what that does to us. And I, as someone who was a pure awe seeker for over a year, it does some pretty great things. And then number 3 is turning to the natural world first when you're stressed. And this one I put up because I think often, it becomes something on our to-do list, and I do it too. Where I'm like, oh, I really need to get outside this weekend, but I gotta do this, I gotta do errands, blah, blah, blah. All the reasons why, right? And it always kind of falls down my list. Even prepping for this trip on, Saturday, I was like stressed, running around packing. I was like, no, I really need to go on a hike. Like, it's been a while. The dog needs to go. I need to go. So I did it. I went for like a 2-hour hike, and it was amazing. It was what I needed and allowed me to recenter. Because actually walks in nature or time in nature helps our focus. It decreases ADHD symptoms, helps with insomnia, obviously decreases our stress that we've talked about. Our brains are really happy when we're in nature. So it should be the first thing we turn to, not our screens. And enter Yoko Village. I am really excited that places like this exist. Eco-villages, communes. I heard about this because I invested in Sangha, but I was really intrigued about the community piece and people choosing to not just buy a home in Costa Rica, obviously a great thing to do, but to build a community together, to, build homes that were aligned with nature, that included nature, that were not separate. When I was a kid, I grew up in suburban Georgia. And most Georgia developers, when they build a neighborhood, clear cut everything, right? And we'd be driving around my town, and I'd just be crying to my mom as like an 8-year-old. Why are they cutting down all the trees? Can't they just cut down the ones they need to? And my mom's answer was always, well, they're lazy, sweetie. I'm sorry. But as a child, I couldn't understand why, I do understand it's easier and we're lazy, but it doesn't make any sense, and it still doesn't to me. So I'm so happy that places like this exist and that intentional communities are forming together. Because you can't ignore nature here, right? When you live in a jungle, nature is knocking on your door every day. It is howler monkeys waking you up at 5 a.m., me both mornings, snakes in your living room, bugs everywhere. It's just part of life, and it's great. It's how we're supposed to be. So back to our case study. Like I said, re-entering my cage has not been easy. I've definitely struggled at times, but I'm learning how to stay rooted in one place while still being wild, like a fish, like a tree, like a monkey. And I do think that our healthiest spot as Homo sapiens is out in nature together, because we are, after all, wild and social creatures, right? And so I want to leave you with this quote. And, I really think that a realigning of our whole way of thinking and living is the only way forward. Because we're on a slippery slope right now, but I do think there are so many people that feel this way, and I know that everyone in this room does. And so I'm really excited to share this with you all, and thank you. And then I do have some references if anyone, I'm happy. And these are 3 of my favorite books that help with my hypothesis. Science stuff. Anyway, happy to answer any questions. Thank you. Lyra? Yeah. Yeah, thank you. Yes, so Lauren's question was, did my time alone on the road, sunsets, sunrises, give me the time to heal? And I do think I maybe missed that point in my talk, but yes, 100%. And a quick anecdote I'll share. I lost my grandmother. All my grandparents are deceased, but the grandmother I was closest with, who basically raised me, in 2009. She was my best friend. And I was a medical student at the time. And I was deep in my rotation. So I went, watched her pass, had to go back to school because I had a test the next day I couldn't get out of. And I never really grieved her. I didn't know that until I was on this journey, and I was on a walk one day in the Anza Borrego Desert. I don't know if anyone's been there in Southern California, but it's beautiful. With my dog. And she loved hummingbirds and flowers and garden. She was very much into nature too. And as I'm walking, I was so happy. I started sobbing out of nowhere. All this grief that I've been holding in for 12 years came out. And it was for her. I finally could let her go. And yeah, I had been, pushing that whole time. And I'd had other things come up too, but that was one loss that I had not let go of fully. And I finally had that space to do so. So yes, I 100% think that time in nature gives you that space. And plant medicine is amazing. I do truly believe in it. But I also think it's not accessible to everyone for a lot of reasons. And I think that a lot of people use it as a crutch. And so I honestly, I did an immersive forest bathing retreat. Happy to talk to anyone about forest bathing, by the way. My favorite subject. But I got as much out of that in 3 days, immersed in nature, no substances whatsoever, as I have from a plant medicine ceremony. And I think we always want a thing. We want a pill. We want a quick fix to our problems, right? But often that fix is just dropping in, slowing down, remembering that this is us too.